The day the beach came alive, the sun hung low in the sky, painting the clouds in streaks of gold and pink. It was the kind of morning that whispered promises of adventure, and for the three Carter siblings, Emma, Jack, and little Sophie, adventure was the only thing on their minds. They had been begging their parents for weeks to take them to the beach. It wasn't just any beach, it was Sandcastle Cove, a stretch of coastline their mom had visited as a child. She always told stories about how magical it felt, how the sand seemed softer, the waves livelier, and the air sweeter. Today they were finally going. The car ride was filled with the usual chaos, Emma and Jack bickering over who got the window seat, Sophie singing off-key nursery rhymes at the top of her lungs, and Mom periodically reminding Dad to watch the road. But the moment they caught their first glimpse of the ocean, sparkling like a field of diamonds, all arguments ceased. The sight was mesmerizing, even for Jack, who usually pretended to be unimpressed by everything. As soon as the car stopped, the kids exploded out of the vehicle like popcorn kernels in a hot pan. Emma, the eldest at 12, carried an air of responsibility, lugging the beach bag filled with sunscreen, towels, and snacks. Jack, 10 and perpetually curious, sprinted toward the shoreline with a plastic shovel in hand, ready to dig to the Earth's core, or at least try. Sophie, only 5, toddled after him, her floppy sun hat bouncing with every step. The beach was a bustling playground of possibilities. Families scattered across the sand like colorful specks, umbrellas dotting the horizon. The salty breeze carried the sound of laughter, the occasional bark of a dog, and the rhythmic crash of waves. "Stay where I can see you," Mom called as the kids disappeared toward the water. Dad was already setting up the umbrella, muttering about how sand always found its way into impossible places. Jack had claimed a patch of sand near the water's edge. "This," he declared, "is where we'll build the greatest sandcastle in history." Emma rolled her eyes but sat down beside him. She was skeptical of his grand plans but secretly enjoyed his enthusiasm. Sophie plopped down unceremoniously, immediately starting to dig with her tiny hands. They worked together, piling up wet sand, sculpting towers and carving out moats. Jack insisted on adding a secret tunnel, which Emma argued was pointless because the tide would wash it away. Sophie, oblivious to their bickering, decorated the castle with seashells she had collected, humming happily to herself as the hours passed. The sandcastle grew more elaborate. It had turrets, a drawbridge made of driftwood, and even a small flag made from a popsicle stick and part of Sophie's napkin. The kids stepped back to admire their masterpiece. "It's missing something," Jack said, squinting at the castle like an architect inspecting blueprints. "Like what?" Emma asked, crossing her arms before Jack could answer. Sophie exclaimed, "A prince and princess. Every castle needs them." Jack groaned. "That's so boring, Sophie. How about a dragon instead?" "A dragon and a princess," Sophie insisted, her lower lip jutting out in protest. Emma sighed. "Fine. Let's find something to be the princess." She scanned the beach and spotted a piece of seaweed. "Here. This can be her hair." Jack laughed. "Seaweed hair? That's kind of creepy, don't you think?" But Sophie didn't mind. She carefully placed the seaweed on top of a small mound of sand, calling it the princess. Jack found a jagged rock and proclaimed it the dragon. He positioned it dramatically on the tallest turret. The tide was beginning to creep closer, but the kids hardly noticed. They were too engrossed in their creation. Suddenly, Sophie gasped and pointed at the water. "Look! The ocean is moving." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Of course it's moving. It's the ocean." "No," Sophie insisted, tugging on Emma's arm. "It's moving funny." Emma and Jack turned to where Sophie was pointing. At first, they didn't see anything unusual. But then, just as a wave receded, they noticed something odd. A faint shimmer in the sand, like sunlight catching on a hidden gem. The shimmer seemed to pulse, growing brighter and then dimming, as though the beach itself were breathing. "That's weird," Jack said, taking a cautious step forward. "Maybe it's just the sun reflecting," Emma suggested, though her voice wavered. But Sophie was already running toward the shimmer, giggling as if it were a game. "It's magic," she squealed. "Sophie, wait," Emma called, but the little girl didn't stop as Sophie reached the spot. She crouched down and touched the shimmering sand. Immediately, a ripple spread outward, like a pebble dropped in a pond. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble. Not enough to knock them over, but enough to make them freeze in place, and then, as if by some unseen force, their sandcastle began to glow. The seaweed princess stood upright, her hair flowing as though caught in an invisible breeze. The jagged rock dragon unfurled wings made of mist and let out a soundless roar. The siblings stared in stunned silence as their sandcastle came alive. Did we just do that?" Jack whispered. Sophie clapped her hands. "I told you it was magic." The sandcastle seemed to grow taller, its tower stretching toward the sky. The moat filled with water, not from the ocean, but from a tiny stream that appeared out of nowhere. Tiny figures made of sand began to march across the drawbridge, waving miniature flags. Emma blinked. This can't be real. But it felt real. They could hear the faint sound of trumpets, the clatter of tiny hooves on sand. The dragon leapt from its perch and soared into the air, circling the castle like a guardian. Jack's face lit up with a mixture of awe and determination. "This is the coolest thing ever. We made a whole kingdom." For the next hour, or maybe it was only minutes, time seemed to blur. The kids played with their enchanted creation. They cheered as the dragon performed loops in the sky, helped the tiny sand figures repair a crumbling turret, and even negotiated a truce between the princess and the dragon, who apparently had a long-standing feud. But as the tide continued to rise, the magic began to fade. The glowing dimmed, the sand figures slowed their movements, and the dragon landed back on its turret, folding its misty wings. "No!" Sophie cried. "Don't go." Emma knelt beside her and put an arm around her shoulders. "It's okay, Sophie. The tide's coming in. It's just how things are." Jack nodded, though his usual bravado was gone. "Yeah, but maybe we can come back and build another one someday." As the ocean claimed the castle, washing it away grain by grain, the kids stood in silence, watching until there was nothing left but smooth, damp sand. When they returned to their parents, Mom asked, "Did you have fun?" The siblings exchanged a look, a secret smile passing between them. "Yeah," Emma said. "It was magical." And as they packed up to leave, Sophie turned to the ocean and waved, certain she saw the faint outline of a dragon in the clouds.